Well, thanks everyone for coming this afternoon. We have the honor, I believe, of being the largest panel.
Yes.
We haven't had to find an extra chair for me. So, and again, thanks for coming. We're going to talk about generative AI because, as we all know, this is something we haven't talked about yet in this conference, right? So, you know, we've been hearing about artificial intelligence literally for decades. But in the past few months, it's just exploded with quite a bit of hype and quite a bit of discussion, as we all know. And, you know, trying to figure out why has it suddenly become such a popular topic, and why is there so much buzz and excitement about generative AI with tools such as ChatGPT, Google Bard, the new Bing, and so on. And I think because the first time ordinary people like us have been able to get our hands on these tools, very powerful tools, and start to experiment and play with them. And there's just been an explosion of innovation in all kinds of ways, both personal and professional. My daughter, when it first came out, she has a small dog. She used it to generate recipes for dog food. So there's no end to the applications that we can imagine in our personal life. But really here today, we're here to talk about what are the enterprise uses of generative AI, and what are some of the guidelines and some of the even issues and challenges with using these new and powerful tools. So to do that, today we have, it's taking 4 panelists to do this. We have a very distinguished panel here. We have Ashish Bansal, who has had a long career in AI and machine learning at companies like Capital One, Amazon, Twitter, Twitch, and now he's at Google, working with the machine learning team, and so he's very close to the action. He has firsthand knowledge of these tools being developed, but he warned us that he may have a nonconformist view. So just because he works for an AI group, don't think he's...
Action and firewood.
We also have Sunil Senan. Sunil, welcome. Senior VP and Business Head for Data and Analytics at Infosys. So Sunil brings a great perspective on how these tools are being used and can be used by his clients. We have Mike Zill. He's the CIO and Chief Administration Officer at Acadia Pharmaceuticals. He's also a board member at Tourmo, which has an AI-powered mobility workflow automation platform to improve the performance of humans and vehicles. So in his day job, he runs an IT group. On the side, he's a board member for an AI company. So he can share his practical applications that he sees for these tools. Finally, we have Shilpi Agarwal. We're really excited to have her here because she really brings a balanced perspective. She is the founder and Chief Data Ethics Officer at Data Ethics for All Foundation, it's a nonprofit, which promotes, get this, ethical considerations as the top priority in decision making, and especially with data and artificial intelligence. So she brings a very important balance to the panel, and we're very happy to have her here. Welcome. So let me start with Ashish. What is generative AI, and how is it different from other forms of AI?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're all awake after that lunch for this panel. And I'm pretty sure Frank didn't ask me this question because I work at Google. Generative AI for me, so far, a lot of the use cases for AI have been around classification, which says, is this good for this person? So it's essentially giving you a yes, no, maybe this, you should watch this video, you should watch this ad, maybe you should write this email. In generative AI, we are firstly seeing actual generation of long-form content, whether it be text or images now, and hopefully video. There's some cases for videos. Pet recipes, as Frank mentioned. I think pet recipes are great because pets can't really tell you that they hated them. Humans might be a different story when you do recipes for humans. So I think that's a key differentiation, and I just want to make a quick point that I feel like AI means that some decisions have to be made, and I don't think we are at the AI stage. I think we are still at the machine learning stage where the machines have learned some useful relations and they're trying to project based on that. I would not replace my doctor with a ChatGPT type yet, because that's where a decision is made.
So you make a distinction between artificial intelligence and machine learning. A lot of us just consider the two the same, but you make a distinction, right?
I do make a distinction. So very succinctly, I'll say that machine learning makes predictions and artificial intelligence makes decisions. As an example, with an X-ray, an ML system can make a prediction whether there's a broken bone. The decision is what kind of cast to put and for how long should the cast be if you need a cast. So that's sort of the distinction I would make.
So would you trust ChatGPT or other generative AI tools to tell you what to do?
Not today.
Not yet.
Not today, not yet. Don't get me wrong, it's super exciting as a technology area. I'm really enthused to see that it has touched the masses. Very few technologies have the ability. I think Mike was relating the story of his dad using this, which is not every day because I get calls from my mom on how to use WhatsApp. So it's kind of a very different ball game so that people can use it. But I think there's a long way to go. I like to say that this is the V1 first version.
Okay.
It's super exciting. But we have seen this story maybe play out in technology a bit, where it takes a few revs before we get it right, whether it was the .com era of websites or mobile commerce or mobile payments. We've seen all of them mature, and I'm very excited about V4, to be honest.
Okay, Sunil, how do you see generative AI? What is it to you?
I think Ashish touched on some of the very important elements of what Gen AI is. Just a couple of points to add. I think Gen AI, as we know today, is the ability to, it's a model that has understood or generated a common understanding of what's out there and allowed people to, people like you and me, who may not be necessarily a specialist at what we're talking about, but allowed them to query that particular model and get the responses, right? So today we know natural language. You can query anything on natural language. Like Ashish said, you could ask a question in natural language and get a response back in an image, or a video that you want to create, or a speech, and things of that nature. So it's a multi-form, model that responds to a prompt.
Responds to a prompt.
Responds to a prompt, and prompt is asked in a natural language, and hence one of the other distinctions that I make with the AIML tools is that it was created by specialists, used for general purpose, but consumers like you and me never had to interact with it. We were the recipients of the outcome of it, and it was very intuitive, so we just followed. What's happening now is allowing the democratization of that capability.
I see.
And making it more accessible to people.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter what your role is, and where you live, and what you do have the ability to now query and get answers based on a common understanding. It does not have as deep a capability on decision making that humans do today, or reasoning and things of that nature, but it's going to get there, and I think those were the versions that Ashish also was reflecting on. So there's a lot more development to come, but that's what Gen AI is, and somewhat different from AI that we've seen.
One more question for Ashish. I heard you make a distinction in our preparation call, and I also heard you on a podcast. You made a distinction between knowledge and intelligence. What is the distinction? And which is ChatGPT or the other generative AI tools? Knowledge and intelligence.
I think this is a fascinating question because I feel like a lot of people confuse one for the other. If I can memorize the entire Encyclopedia Britannica, I may be quite knowledgeable, but am I truly intelligent? I think that's something as a question for the audience and everybody to think about. I feel that with large language models, we now have the ability to process humongous amounts of data, truly humongous amounts of data. Just to put that in context, ChatGPT has an API which allows you about 64,000 tokens to be fed.
64,000
tokens.
Tokens.
A token is about, so you can assume that a word is about 1.5 tokens or 1.3 tokens. that's roughly a 250-page paperback book. Right? So you can feed that much information. You can actually send it a book and ask it to summarize. It's great, fantastic. But can it actually understand, like we have a model in our head of the world, how it operates. And these models don't have any of that operational characteristics. So they don't have intelligence, they have knowledge. Now, there's a lot of knowledge workers, I think. So obviously there are implications, and that's where I think some productivity gains can be had, which is if my job requires knowing a lot of different things and making sure that I'm able to check them off, then it's a great tool. Can I really assume that it's going to replace me? That's where I feel like the intelligence part plays a bigger role than the knowledge part.
Okay, well, we're going to get into the job implications possibly if we have time at the end here, but that's a little bit of a tease for what some of the impact might be.
Frank made me to put that in.
Good. Well, we're going to get to you two in just a minute, but let's finish with Sunil. What do you see with your clients as the economic opportunity to exploit these tools? I mean, what do you see?
Yeah, I think if you really think about how these waves of transformations have come in the industry, not now but from 17 onwards, there's been an embrace for that in the society, in the nations, and enterprises have played a very big role in driving that forward. We really see this at the two ends of the spectrum from an economic opportunity perspective. On one side, you have the ability to take out those inefficiencies that exist.
I see.
Any work of summarization takes hours to days, depending on what you're trying to do. A lot of that can get shortened to a few seconds. You could apply in the context of enterprises to corporate governance, to business operations, to call centers, virtual assistant kind of applications, which are essentially taking those inefficiencies out, learning the enterprise context and data to be able to then provide the output that is looking for. It can be a Q&A or it can actually be a report that one wants to generate. On the other end of the spectrum is the ability for enterprises to disrupt the market, create new business models, new AI-driven operating models. In the previous eras, we have seen that to come as a next step, but we are in a world where you are challenged by startups almost every day. Today, as we speak about this, there are hundreds and thousands of these startups that are beginning, and our enterprise customers know this. So they got to start embracing some of these ideas now. So there is a continuous tension between operational efficiency and some of those which are near term, and you can maximize your profits by getting into that domain, and then there is competitiveness, creating new business models and building out a more sustainable.
Okay, so you see it in both places. You see
it in both
these
places.
new tools being used to improve efficiencies
Yep.
within operations, but also to disrupt ourselves, creating new business models. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, and the side of creating discontinuous growth or disruption is more reimagining the business model. So reimagining the business model is not necessarily limited to an enterprise.
Okay.
It's today, it has become more ecosystem-led play.
Okay.
So how can you run supply chain differently, given the things that we're seeing in the AI space? Is the conversation on that side, and then there is efficiency on the other.
Excellent. Okay, now we'll come to Mike. Mike is the practitioner here, right? Mike, how are you seeing enterprise opportunities for generative AI? Or through your own experience?
Yeah, I was going to say that what I would encourage everybody to do is if you haven't used it, go use it. Find any reason just to get out there, log on and use it and try to solve a simple problem.
Mike, just one moment. I did mean to get a show of hands here at the beginning and I forgot. How many of you have played with any of these generative AI tools? Okay, how many of you have not? It's easier to count. There's maybe one or two.
Yeah, I mean,
okay, let's have this advice.
Yeah, it's happening, and I know it's happening because, when you park your car in valet, they start talking to you about ChatGPT, and so it's happening, right? So from my point of view, we're not at the advanced, let's use it in the supply chain. Certainly AI is in the supply chain, but this generative AI is not really in the supply chain. It's really something that I almost consider a personal productivity tool or some kind of digital assistance. And I was showing my age, thinking about the little paperclip on the Microsoft, remember that thing, whatever that guy's name? Clippy, whatever that was. Except for a really smart one, like really, really smart, right? And so what I've used it for is really personal writing. And so we're all in this audience, we have to write stuff. We do. We have to create presentations, narratives, performance reviews, everything you can imagine. I'm turning to this generative AI almost instinctively now, after just a couple of months, saying, hey, I can minimize time to first draft if I just give it some basic facts and then let it kind of build something. And then I can take that and manipulate it like I want to. And so that's probably the number one way I'm seeing it work for me. An example.
So like on a personal level then,
yeah.
Even if the organization as a whole doesn't have a program, you're saying professionals can use it immediately
Yes.
to help make themselves more creative or more efficient, right?
Oh, totally. And I think I'll give you an example at home. My wife's mother passed a while back, and it happens to all of us. And at that moment, you get writer's block. It's so personal. You really can't do much. And she had to write a eulogy. And so, of course, she didn't know. I didn't even talk to her about ChatGPT ever, but at that point. But now we do. We talk about it all the time. It's crazy. But at the same time, I said, honey, just give me the list of facts that you would like to tell somebody, about your mother, about your relationship, how much you loved her, these different things, and let me help you. I didn't tell her how I was going to help her. And then, of course, I snuck over to the side and used ChatGPT and wrote a couple different versions, put it back in front of her, and it broke the writer's block.
Wow.
She was immediately able to take it. And so this is what's happening in our companies, too. And, of course, we have the hey, let's don't let the cat out of the bag and the intellectual property get away, but a lot of us don't deal in intellectual property every day. We're dealing in just writing a paragraph or two, and so it's very helpful.
Well, the first time you actually shared this story with us in our prep call, and I thought, well, that's a great story, Mike, but it really doesn't have a lot to do with the enterprise. But then I got thinking about it and said, how many times as a leader have you been asked to say a few words?
Write an apology, write a condolences, write whatever it may be, all kinds of help.
I mean, even as leaders, we go to funerals and we give eulogies. I mean, this is a very
what we do.
real experience, isn't it?
Part of it, yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
I'll give another example. Just in the organization, I was helping a friend of mine who's trying to buy a company, and he had this huge list in Excel of just software applications with no information about them. What are they? You can just imagine 1,000 things. And I just looked at him and I said, I know what we're going to do with this. So I just copied that, went into ChatGPT, pasted it in there and said, write a short description, categorize each of these software applications. And it was just a few minutes, we had it all done. And it was really accurate. I was so impressed, How many hours is that? That's 3 hours for us. So productivity is going to change. It is changing.
All right, so also, apart from just the personal use, you are a CIO.
Yes.
How do you see, still, with all your hobbies,
Yeah.
how do you see these generative AI tools changing the jobs or helping the professionals in your IT organization?
Productivity, number one. I mean, the IT guys have been leaning into this since probably before they were supposed to. They were already into it. And so everything from just looking at writing some complex shell script or SQL or something, or trying to find, they can do that so much faster than they could in the past. And then things like documentation, which nobody loves. It's great for documentation. It's really good for documentation. So another story we're using it for, we're trying to go into our business intelligence world where we have lots and lots of code and not much documentation, and try to help us build that out into a way that we feel a lot better about it. Just one example.
So there's a program right now within your IT organization to exploit these tools in these kind of ways, or is it just
There
pretty
is.
much self-initiative?
Well, a lot of it started with self. We don't have a big project because you don't need one. This is small experimentation, I think the Amazon guy said. We're experimenting.
Right.
We don't think we have a huge possibility of letting intellectual property out the door. I'm not saying we have it, but I don't think we do.
Okay.
But we're still going to have to write a policy and try to educate people on what does it mean. So we're at that stage.
Okay, you're also the Chief Administration Officer, is that right?
Yes.
And what functions that, like HR or?
HR, procurement, facilities. I always say pretty much whatever nobody else wants to do, it sort of flows to the.
Are you seeing opportunities there as well for generative AI?
I think at the moment, HR is probably the greatest opportunity. Think about the job descriptions. Well, I'd love to hire that person for you, but I need a job description. And not every company has a catalog of job descriptions. They can just pull it down, modify, go. But boy, ChatGPT sure has a good insight into job descriptions. And it, again, minimum time to draft product. And so that's one example. Performance reviews. A good prompt I've used is act like a leadership coach. That's the prompt to ChatGPT. And then help me understand how I can coach somebody about blah, 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 blah. They're doing these things, let me know. Here it comes right back out, you know. And so at least it gives you, again, a starting point. Then you look at that, is that reasonable? Yeah, that's reasonable, okay.
So again, the writer's block.
Writer's block is eliminated, yes.
Okay. Let's go back to Sunil here. How do you personally use ChatGPT or Google Bard or the new Bing?
Yeah, no, quite a bit of it actually. You know, for us to be able to help our clients, we got to experiment with some of these technologies ourselves. And I personally use this technology as soon as it came out for any executive meetings that I have. It takes me a few days to figure out their priorities, the executive that I'm meeting, what kind of press releases and or other sound bites that have been sent, you know, in the market. Really understanding, you know, what their current financial position is, and you know, things of that nature. Just trying to understand and relate to the company where that executive works. That work I started to do more like a parallel run. You know, we are not at the stage where you can completely trust the output that comes there.
Okay.
I use this more as a parallel run. Like Mike said, the first draft of that summary comes out there. We still do our validations and verifications, make sure that, you know, we got that output right. But yeah, after that, you know, there are a number of different uses to this, right? Understanding industries, sustainability. These are some of the areas that you do look out in the public domain to really put your, you know, context around that before we take up initiatives. So I do use it quite a lot.
Okay, now I'm going to ask Shilpi. Get you into this discussion too. I know you're dying to share with us, but before you share about some of the challenges, how do you use ChatGPT or other generative AI tools? Do you use them personally?
I do. I use them a lot. So productivity number one. For anything that I even used it for tax advice. It
For
does
what?
tax.
Tax?
Tax.
Oh.
Yes. And it does give you a disclaimer that, oh, I'm not a tax attorney and you should ask the legal for that. But it still gives you some framework to think about. If there is something that you're thinking about, you get the advice, like you read 50 blogs and what you could infer on your own. It puts it all there for you. And I would say the proof is in the pudding. So it's in the how you ask the question. And that also is an art. And it takes a long time to like reiterate and get the right question to get the right answer from ChatGPT. And I've also seen teenagers, like I have a daughter who's in high school, and as ChatGPT came out, I asked her, like, what are your sentiments? Some districts have banned this, so what are you guys thinking about it? So she's like, yeah, we've been talking about, some students have been talking about it at school, that yes, for the essay, it's great first draft, and then you put it in a paraphrasing tool, and then you put it in the third tool. So basically, and then you take that output from the third tool, and then you rewrite it in some of your own words, and then this whole tool that like makes you sure that there is no, what is it called, that it's not taken from somewhere.
Plagiarism.
Plagiarism. It just knocks it out. So it can't catch that. It was, the starting point was ChatGPT. So look how smart our audiences are. So I want to say that as we are developing solutions, products for generative and for the next generation, whether it is enterprise or edtech or any other, we need to think about how our consumers are smart. Banning them, pausing these tools, or taking a pause on this industry or innovation is not going to help. We need to walk with that pace. We need to think about how our audience is going to use it. And yes, think about unintended consequences before they happen, and we need to make sure that we are one step ahead of them.
Excellent. So let's talk a little bit about ethics. Okay, so I've been dying to ask you about this. And we actually haven't talked much about this in our preparation, but you had this ethics, data ethics for all practice prior to this explosion in interest in artificial intelligence. And it was really around data, ethics and data. Tell us about why are ethics a consideration with artificial intelligence? What's the ethical concern?
So a lot of ethical considerations, especially with generative AI, it uses huge amounts of data to train the model, right? That's the whole premise. We need huge amounts of data to train this model. And it starts from data collection. So there are a lot of ethical concerns. I'll touch upon a few. It starts from data collection and acquisition. Where are we collecting, gathering this data from is the number one question we should be asking as we are developing these solutions. Are we web scraping it from the web? Are we picking it up from the public domain? Are we using Creative Commons licenses to do that? Are we asking for explicit permission from our data subjects? Are we putting clear privacy policies right front, up and center for them to see as to what data is being collected and how is it going to be used? And then do we have a sunset policy? How much time are we going to store that data? Do we have explicit consent on that, or is it an implied opt-in model that we are forced opt-in model that we are using for our data subjects? If they have given us permission one time, do they have the permission to retract that? Right to be forgotten. There are some, CCPA gives us some rights, not all states have implemented it. Some states are in the process of implementing some of that. But yes, the right to be forgotten is a real thing. 90 days businesses have to turn around and delete all the information, at least the personal PII, the personal identifiable information on that person needs to be deleted. And what if we've used this data, if we say that we've anonymized it and we've then used to train our systems, and then what if it gets reverse engineered in some way that the spy information is released or it's open? So there's just, and then there's bias and discrimination, right? I mean, are we taking into account that the data is complete? It involves all the audiences that we need for the solution we are building it for.
Yeah, so these concerns, it's really, the concerns about AI and the ethics is really around the data, right?
So that covered some of the data part, but then there is the algorithm part and then there is the implementation part. How is the algorithm? So we need to make sure that the algorithm is audited properly so that there is a cognitive diverse body that is, auditing it or even looking at it, so we are not having confirmation bias. People who are building the models, getting the data, we have this, if it's only looked at from one lens, we can have confirmation biases inbuilt. So yeah, so I just covered the data, but there are a lot of ethical concerns around the model. There are a lot of ways that we can mitigate these risks for the implementation.
I see. So Ashish, is Google concerned about these considerations, and what are you doing about it?
I think what I'm allowed to say
Yes,
is that we take it very seriously. And
you take it seriously.
very, very seriously. And it's just, so there is the ethics part, but it's also good business. I don't think we should consider ethics as separate from business.
Yes.
Because if ethical businesses stand longer, if you think about search, let me just take an example of Google search. When search came out, there were many different companies providing search. People might remember Lycos or Yahoo and all the rest. I probably date myself here. Today, if you were to want to settle an argument, somebody can say something like, I Googled it, and that settles an argument. I think a lot of people may have had that experience. I think what's that's saying is that you trust that the information that you Googled was right, and that comes from an ethical basis. Without ethics, it's very hard to build trust. And I think the reason why a lot of people sometimes think like, why can't Google respond faster to many of these things, is you have to make sure that you do it in the right way.
I see.
And it takes time and effort, and I think that's what's happening internally at Google. Even if you look at Jeff Hinton's tweet yesterday, New York Times mischaracterized his resignation, and then he had to tweet saying, I do believe Google is acting responsibly, but I want to be able to share my own thoughts, not as a Google employee.
I see. Let's talk about some of the challenges. Let's go beyond the buzz in our title, right? So Sunil, what is a hallucination?
Hallucination is a...
And I don't mean in college, in
Yeah.
the 60s.
So I think it's the phenomenon where you are getting the answer as if it sounds very factual and is based on, real intelligence, but it's actually incorrect.
It's incorrect.
It's incorrect.
And why is a generative AI model prone to hallucinations?
And I think we touched on this topic, but I think we can make it a little bit more explicit because the generative AI has learned from the data that it was trained on. And that data is full of errors, injustices, biases, ethical, considerations or concerns that it can't differentiate between right and wrong. And when it gives out a response, the response is framed in a way that it makes it very believable, unless you're a specialist.
I see.
So democratization of this model poses that challenge. If we looked at it in the context of making this an AI twin to a specialist, the specialist will be able to tell the difference between this and that.
I see.
You put it in the hand of non-specialist, which has its own value. Messaging for a non-brand person is a great value. It adds productivity. But at the same time, you also run the risk of processing information or an answer that's essentially incorrect.
Okay, let me ask Ashish here. Some people have said this hallucination problem will go away as soon as we load more training data into the model. Do you think that's true?
So the amount of training data, if we talk only about text, it's fascinating to consider how much data exists in the world. I don't think enough people think about this as a problem. There is a lot of data, per se, on Twitter, on Reddit, but would you call that information? Maybe, maybe not. One way to frame information is something that's published in a peer-reviewed journal, or in a book, or something that your professor taught you, or if it exists in the US Library of Congress, then it is verified actual information. It's not that large. It's probably trillions of tokens, but the models are being trained on trillions of tokens already. So one thing that I would just say is people should consider how much data there is actually to train, and there may or may not be that much. At some point, the models are consuming more than is being generated in terms of new novel pieces of data. Not human conversation, like we can sing songs and write poetry all day, but like that, like in terms of like actual data. I think what these models need is grounding.
Okay.
Grounding is a technique where whatever it's generating, why is it generating that? Is it grounded in some article, a newspaper report, a book, or a peer-reviewed paper? So you force the model to ground what it's generating, and then you can solve it. So it's not necessarily about data, but it's adding techniques to ground whatever it's generating.
So by grounding, you're talking about citations, giving the source
like that, yes.
of the information, or they call explainability, right?
So I hesitated to use the term explainability because we are not necessarily able to explain how the model grounded it, but we are asking the model to be grounded. So we are caring more about the outcome where, and this is true for a peer-reviewed paper, right? If you make an assertion in a peer-reviewed paper of something exists, there's a list of like citations, 16, 17, 23, and so like, that's what you do, right? And that's how you get it through. So why don't we ask these generative AI models to do the same thing, where if it's making an assertion, and then you can evaluate whether this assertion is correct or not, and then you can give it feedback to the model, and the model over time changes. So I think grounding is really important.
Shilpi, would you like to add to that? Do you agree with him?
I forgot the question.
We're talking about citations and grounding, the AI model being able to substantiate where the information came from.
So I like what Ashish said, that there's a lot of data, but is that information? So I feel like even unstructured data like on tweets and videos and social media, there is a lot of data. It may not be valuable information per se, but there is a lot of metadata in it. And there can be a lot of insights from those metadata also that can be extracted. So there are different levels of information. Some information like intelligence versus knowledge. So there are different kinds of data. Some are good for information, some are good for knowledge, some are good for training, and a lot of things can be used based on what the use case is.
I see. Mike, in an earlier session, someone made reference to the Samsung case where they lost confidential trade secrets. Do you have any concern at Acadia Pharmaceuticals that inadvertently you might lose some proprietary information?
Well, of course, we always have to have concern when it's possible. I think the likelihood for us, just the nature of our business, is less, but not zero. And so I think as we're developing our policies, one thing I asked my CISO about on this subject, I said, is there any chance we could use some AI to help us keep AI from stealing data? I mean, so I was trying to get bot-on-bot violence going, or something to kind of protect us. But I think those kind of tools will come soon. And now we have to be cautious and aware and thoughtful. But no, I don't think it's the same idea. We're not writing digital intellectual property.
I see.
We do have chemical, but because we're regulated, all that's public knowledge. So.
Right. And go ahead,
I
please.
would like to add to this. So I think there is a lot of discussion in terms of who owns this, right? Generative AI is creating new content that never existed, and it's learning from that content. To train this model, we took arts, music that was in the creative domain, public domain, and we used it to generate. Now, who owns the copyright or the IP to those styles of painting that has taken years for artists to develop and make it their own style? You can't put copyright on it because it's generative. It's not an exact replica of the artist's work, and yet somehow it has learned from that artist's work, and it is infringing on the livelihood of that artist, right? So I think we are in a lot of gray area, and so I would like to say that we have an opportunity. It's like a brand new road, and we have the opportunity as leaders to put in the lanes and do the right thing here. And we don't have to wait for the government, they're doing their own thing, but policies will take time. And I think we need to step up and do it before the policies. There should not be a slap on our wrist to do the right thing. We need to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do.
Excellent.
I think on that same vein, though, is that we are all standing on the shoulders of giants, as I recall somebody talking about. So where do you draw the line?
Yes.
Who owns what? It's very gray. I agree.
Well, we're coming up on the end of our time, and I do want to get this lightning round question in. Okay. The title of this panel, I wanted to change it to Generative AI, Secret Sauce, or Recipe for Disaster. But Anupam would not let me change it. So I said, I'm going to work it in anyway. So let me ask each of you, and I only want one or two sentences. Is generative AI the secret sauce, or is it a recipe for disaster?
Well, I think all transformations, we have embraced with the strong foundation that we were discussing. We like to think of it as 5 very strong foundations of trust, ethics, compliance, privacy, and security. And I think the entire technology evolution is going to move in the direction that it makes it sustainable for us as human race. So I think it's
Essentially the secret sauce.
It's a secret sauce.
Okay. Ashish.
I thought about it a little bit, and in food analogy, I'll say it's like hot sauce. Too much of it may cause you discomfort. You gotta use it with caution and use it to taste, as depending on your circumstance. But super exciting.
Excellent. Shilpi.
Secret sauce all the way. Just use it with guardrails.
I would use it with kindness.
Yes, use it. A lot of.
I think it's both, and I think we have the power to make it the hot
Yes,
sauce.
exactly.
All right. Thank you very much to our panelists, and thank you all for listening.